You're listening to Voice of Israel.
Josh Hasten here, Voice of Israel. We are live from Jerusalem, Israel. It is the 16th of February, 2015, 3:05 in the afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us here. Hope you are safe, most importantly, in your part of the world. You too can be involved in the conversation on Twitter at VO Israel, Voice of Israel on Facebook. Give us a like, and our website, voiceofisrael.com. Since we spoke last, the top story throughout the Jewish world has been, over the last several days, the terror attack in Copenhagen, in which Dan Uzan, the guard of the synagogue there in Copenhagen, was murdered by a terrorist. Prime Minister Netanyahu, on Sunday, opening the cabinet meeting, said that murderous attacks on Jews in Europe, because they are Jews, are likely to continue. And he called on the continent's Jews to immigrate to Israel. He said the following, quote, "Extreme Islamic terrorism has struck Europe again, this time in Denmark. We send our condolences to the Danish people and to the Jewish community in Denmark. Jews have been murdered again on European soil only because they are Jews, and this wave of terrorist attacks, including murderous anti-Semitic attacks, is expected to continue." Of course, we here at Voice of Israel and all the people of Israel send our condolences to the family in Denmark, and our prayers are with the community there in Copenhagen. One of those who actually survived the attack, her name is Charlotte Thalmay. She is the owner of Jewish Copenhagen, a guide agency there. Till last year, she was the president of the Zionist Federation of Denmark, and before that, she was on the board of the Jewish community in Denmark, and she was a guest at the bat mitzvah on Saturday night, which was taking place at the time of the attack. She was hid in a safe room in the basement for hours, evacuated. She was a friend of Dan Uzan. Charlotte, thank you so much for joining us here during this troubling time at Voice of Israel.
It's my pleasure.
How are you doing, Charlotte? How are you coping with this horrible tragedy, this terror attack in which a member of your community, a brave member of your community, from what I understand, preventing an even greater tragedy, has been killed, has been murdered?
Well, I suppose we have to move on and get over it, but it will take some time because, honestly, we are still in shock. The whole Jewish community of Denmark is in shock. And those of us, about 40 people who were still left at the time in the middle of the night of the bar mitzvah party, we were the ones sitting in the basement and being evacuated. So to us, it was, although we had psychologists trying to help us through it, we are still in shock, I must say.
At the time of the attack in which you were inside at a community bat mitzvah, how did you know something was going on? Did you hear the shots? Describe the scene as the events unfolded there on Saturday night.
Well, we were just about to go dancing, having a little horror for the bat mitzvah girl, but all of a sudden the guard, our own security guard, came in shouting, "Go on down to the basement." And we all ran up, left everything behind, which means also shoes, jackets, keys for our houses and everything. Went to the basement, which we needed later though. And down there we were in a tiny, tiny room, 40 people, lots of children, and we didn't know what happened upstairs. Not in the beginning, at least.
And then you were kept downstairs for hours. And how did you finally know it was over? Did the police come in and say it's now safe to come up? How did you know it was time to come out of that basement?
Well, the whole thing was like a bad American movie, with a lot of squatters, the policemen dressed all in black with the snipers, and then they opened up the door and said, now we had to go out, and we were going through backyards, climbing over, I don't know what, in order to get out in a different street away from the synagogue and the community center. Buses were waiting for us belonging to the police, and we were being escorted out of the city to a police station in the outskirts of Copenhagen.
And tell us, you said that you knew personally the heroic guard Dan Uzan, who, from what I understand, prevented an even greater tragedy, a massacre, if you will. Tell us, if you can, about Mr. Uzan, may he rest in peace, about what you knew about this hero of a man.
Dan was one of those people from our security guard, from protecting the Jewish community, doing it with a great heart and also with a nice and polite attitude towards everybody. He was there And I'm telling you, we went to this bat mitzvah party without our kids this time. And my son, Simon, says to me, I hope it's going to be Dan guarding you. Because he was more than 2 meters tall, like a big teddy bear. And my son felt so secure in his hand whenever he was being a part of events in the Jewish Community Center. And unfortunately, yes, it was Dan. And unfortunately, he was the one who took the shot for all of us.
Yeah, it sounds like a true hero from what I'm reading in terms of the descriptions of the man and how he acted during the event itself. Now, several hours before that, there was another attack at a free speech gathering at a cafe. Were you already aware of those details when you went to that bat mitzvah? Was that already out in the open that another attack did in fact happen?
It's very interesting. We were passing that site on the way to the bat mitzvah party in the inner city of Copenhagen, where the community is. And we were looking at it and what is going on here? We saw all the radio and television, national television, and lots of police. When we finally arrived at the bat mitzvah party, Mette, who was the hostess, the mother of the bat mitzvah girl, said, welcome. I'm sure you all have heard about the other event that just happened. And, in Jewish, that means she was addressing the non-Jewish guests. This means in our situation, we have to be extraordinarily aware because we never know if we're going to be a part of it. And honestly, we were like, okay, don't exaggerate now. Because you have a thing going on somewhere else, which is about freedom of speech, don't always think that it's going to include the Jews. We should only know.
And unfortunately, just as was the case in Paris just a month ago, it started at a different venue in which people were killed expressing their rights to freedom of speech, and then it moved on to the Jewish community as well. As I opened the show, I talked about the Prime Minister of Israel calling on all Jews to come home to Israel. That being said, the Rabbi of Copenhagen, Chief Rabbi Yair Melchior, was quoted in the Daily Telegraph as saying he was disappointed by the comments. He said, terror is not a reason to move to Israel. What is your personal feeling on this issue? Should the Jews in Copenhagen and Denmark come home to Israel now at this point, or do you believe that you should remain, rely on your resolve, etc., and weather the storm and continue to live in that part of the world?
I totally back up Yair Melchior, our rabbi here, because I think, first of all, moving to Israel, going on Aliyah is something you do positively. You're going for something that you would like to do and support. Like running away from somewhere is such a bad start on being a new immigrant in Israel. And another thing is I'm also a bit disappointed on Netanyahu. I feel it's like a political issue for him coming out saying that before elections. And seriously, we are Danish. We are Danish citizens. We are part of a usually very nice society brought up here. We have our background here, our cultural background. Why would we give up that to move to Israel unless we do it from Zionist reasons? So I don't think this is the right way to look at it. So I totally agree.
Charlotte, you're a tour guide there, the owner of Jewish Copenhagen, a guide agency. What's your expectation at this point after this attack? Are you getting calls today from people who are still coming out and want to get tours of the community, or do you think business will encounter a lull until things get back to normal 100%? What's your feeling?
It's a good question, and at the very moment, I don't have a clue. I can tell you I did get a lot of messages, but not from coming clients, but from previous ones, mainly American Jews who come here on their vacation and want to see the city from a Jewish perspective. And they are giving me and the Jewish community, and especially Dan Ozan, the condolences. You say that in English?
Yes, condolences.
They're like apologizing and supporting me and the Jewish community, which is very, very nice, and I appreciate it. But we all know, especially you living in Israel, that everybody's talking about this event today. Tomorrow, it's going to be half of them, and next week, most people have forgotten, and we are moving on. So that's what I expect too.
Charlotte Thalmay, owner of Jewish Copenhagen, a leader in the community of Denmark. We wish you only good things here in Israel. We are also way too accustomed to terror, as we experience very, very often here. So we want to send our best to the Ozan family and just send our love to the Jews who are in Copenhagen these days, perhaps a little bit more cautious, a little bit more nervous as a result of this attack. I thank you so much for taking your time taking the time to come on my show today, and wishing you only safety and all the best, Charlotte.
Thank you for covering the story. Thank you very much.
Only good things. Take care. This is Josh Hasten, Voice of Israel. Thank you so much for joining us today. There's so much news going on, and we're just going to finish up a little bit with Copenhagen, and then I want to discuss it in depth a little bit later. But just after the break, we're going to be speaking to Hadar Sela from BBC Watch. She's going to be here in studio. But in addition to the chief rabbi of Copenhagen, Rabbi Ir Melchior, who disagreed with the prime minister in terms of Aliyah. There was also some feedback from Mark Levy, a member of the executive board of the Council of the Jewish community in that area as well. He also says it should be done from love, Aliyah that is, and not from fear. I have a lot to say on this topic, and I'm going to share that with you probably after the hard break, after the bottom of the hour news. Should we make Aliyah anyway? Should we make Aliyah out of fear? Should it be out of love? When is the right time to come to Israel? I have my own theories on it, and feel free to get involved in the conversation. I'll give our phone numbers now, 077-899-4111, 077-899-4111. Think about that now. Should we come on Aliyah now? Should we come only out of Zionism? Should we come out of fear? Is it wrong to come out of fear? Think about that. Or in the U.S. and Canada, you can call in 929-502-555, 929-502-555. We're going to take a short break right now. When we come back, Hadar Sela from BBC Watch is in our green room. She's going to come in studio now. This is Josh Hasten, Voice of Israel. You too can be involved in the conversation at VO Israel on Twitter, Voice of Israel Facebook, voiceofisrael.com. And I'm extremely moved by the words of Charlotte after that terror attack, a survivor of terror herself. Josh Hasten, we will be right back. Don't go anywhere.
My father was Jewish. My mother was Christian. Both of them were extreme leftists, and I did not have a religion until I was 49 years old, and then I opted for Islam based on my experience as a journalist covering the war in Bosnia. I feel like a person with a brother and a sister, and I love the brother and the sister equally.
That was Sufi Muslim Stephen Suleiman Schwartz. For the full interview, listen to Rejuvenation with Eve Harrow on Voice of Israel.
You're listening to Voice of Israel.
Meet Pastors Cheryl Hauer and Rebecca Verbaden of Bridges for Peace, which fosters better relations between Jews and Christians in Israel and the world over.
Christian anti-Semitism and various Christian doctrines have caused tremendous suffering for the Jewish people, but we believe if we are going to be the people of the book that God wants us to be, we need to come together.
That's In the Lion's Den with Daniel Seaman and Daniela Traub on Voice of Israel.
We are back live in Jerusalem. Josh Hasten here, Voice of Israel. It is 3:18 in the afternoon, 16th of February, 2015. Thank you so much for joining us. You, too, should be involved in the conversation on Twitter at VO Israel, Voice of Israel on Facebook, and, of course, our website, voiceofisrael.com. In studio is Hadar Sela, the managing editor of BBC Watch. BBC Watch, their modus operandi, if you will, is to monitor BBC coverage of Israel for accuracy and impartiality. She has a special interest in the influence of the media on the British public's perceptions of the Middle East and the Islamist networks operating in the UK. We've had her on the phone. Now we have her here in person, and it's an honor. Hadar Sela, welcome to the Josh Hasten Show, Voice of Israel.
Thank you, Josh. Lovely to be here.
So, a difficult week here in the Jewish world. Unfortunately, we have too many difficult weeks with terrorism in Europe, terrorism in this part of the world as well. But I want to focus on the media coverage. You focus exclusively, if I understand right, on the BBC, the most prominent, the largest. I mean, prominent, I guess, is a relative term. The largest media network in England, covering world news. Tell us the latest. What's going on in terms of the way the BBC is covering Israel in terms of current events? What's happening now in our world?
Well, the BBC, of course, isn't just the largest broadcaster in England. It's the largest broadcaster in the world, in fact, and the most influential. And that's why the BBC is so important. We've seen the recent attacks in Copenhagen. We've seen the ones before in France, in Paris, the Charlie Hebdo attacks. But of course, it didn't start there. It's a problem in Europe, the anti-Semitism that's been going on for a very, very long time. the British organisation, the CST, the Community Security Trust, which takes care of security for British Jews in the UK, recently put out a report and explained that, in fact, this was the worst year on record so far for anti-Semitism. And, of course, a lot of that was due to the events of the summer, the events we had here in Israel in the summer, the Operation Protective Edge, and the coverage of that operation definitely affects events in Europe. The all-party group on anti-Semitism in the UK, in the British Parliament, has also recently put out a report. And in that report, too, the BBC is cited. They say BBC coverage, the volume, just the sheer volume of BBC coverage, distorted people's picture of what was going on in the Middle East. So it obviously has a very, very important effect. And we're actually just in the final stages of organising a conference on that subject. It'll be here in Jerusalem on March 1st in the evening, 7 o'clock in the evening. And we'll be discussing how UK media coverage affects, how the coverage of UK media outlets of events here in Israel affects anti-Semitism in Britain. We can see a definite link. You can come along and join the conversation with us. It's at the Agron Guest House, and you can find the link to register on our website, which is bbcwatch.org.
Watch.org. And I want to talk more about the conference, but ironically, the things that you were saying in terms of the coverage of Israel, the amount of coverage of Israel, gives the possibility that the BBC and, of course, others can skew the coverage based on the sheer volume. And it's ironic to me how in several different instances that I'm thinking of just off the top of my head, you had the woman who was interviewed at the funeral for the Jewish victims there in Paris.
At the march.
Yeah, how
yes.
she was put on the spot, and
yes.
essentially, the way Israel treats the Arabs in this region was to blame for that attack. And then you had it again with a leading rabbi, I believe. I think this was actually Sky. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Sky,
Sky,
yes.
Also, essentially accusing or blaming the anti-Semitism on Israel's policies, etc. I want you to comment on that. It's ironic because, on one hand, we are here saying that it's because of that sheer volume and the way things are skewed. That's the real reason that these incidents happen. And the BBC themselves aren't of course not blaming themselves, not looking in the mirror. They're blaming Israel for those incidents. I want you to comment on that, please.
I monitored very closely the entire coverage put out by the BBC during July and August this year, during the time of the Operation Protective Edge. Viewers of BBC television actually saw nearly 3 times more filmed coverage from the Gaza Strip than they did from Israel. The last 2 weeks of the war, it was as if nothing had happened in Israel at all. There was very little coverage of the missile attacks here. There was very little coverage of what happened here. It was very one-sided coverage. You would think there was only something going on in Gaza. And since then, they're calling it the Gaza War. It's not the war that took place in Israel and Gaza. It's the Gaza War. You wouldn't know anything had happened in this country at all. So that obviously affects the way people see things. The event in Paris, where, just to recap for listeners, a BBC reporter was interviewing a lady who'd come to the march to show solidarity after the attacks on Charlie Hebdo and on the Hyper Cacher supermarket. And the lady was talking about the fears of the Jewish community in Paris, and the BBC reporter actually said to her, "Well, some people would say it's because of what happens actually, he did say some people would say that Palestinians have suffered at Jewish hands, not even Israeli, Jewish hands." That's a very significant point, and it's actually an anti-Semitic statement. To blame Jews abroad for things that happened in Israel is according to the EUMC definition of anti-Semitism. It's anti-Semitism. There's been a lot of noise about that. There were a lot of complaints made to the BBC. The issue is currently under review. We're expecting an answer on the 28th of February, if I'm not mistaken. It will be interesting to see how the BBC reacts to that, because it was a very clear-cut case of anti-Semitism in a BBC broadcast, and of course, people were very upset by it.
And then there was another reporter, correct me or refresh my memory, who sent out a Twitter message. Was it like Wilcox was his name, a reporter there from the BBC. Also, he said some controversial statements, tying in Israel. Do you know what I'm referring to there?
No.
So I'll have to go back and take a look at that. But in addition to the issue of volume in terms of the coverage of Israel, what about the actual content itself in terms of it being skewed? I've actually taken a reporter from the BBC back when we had Gush Katif in 2003 before the so-called disengagement. And, she was telling me, and I don't know if things have changed, you tell me, she said, well, the Arabs, the Palestinians actually say that it's the other way around, that the coverage is slanted pro-Israel. What would you say to that? And, those are some of the complaints that the BBC apparently gets, that the coverage is too pro-Israel. What would you say?
They do get such complaints, and at least part of the time, some of those complaints are actually part of a political campaigning rather than genuine complaints. There's an organisation in the UK called the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which we can pretty much be honest and say makes the BBC's life a misery. And a lot of it's from a political motivation rather than actual dealing with the journalistic side of things. But I think if you look at coverage, there are certain signposts. For instance, you will not see the BBC using the word terrorist when it talks about Israel. They never, ever use the word terrorist. It might be a gunman, it might be a militant. The attacks we had last November, there were these mysterious cars all on their own crashing into people in Jerusalem. There was no use of the word terrorist at all. It's another area I've studied quite a lot. In Northern Ireland, they do use the word terrorist. The shootings in Norway, the Andreas Breivik shootings, they do call them terrorism. Attacks against, there was an attack in Mali, I think, against some oil people a few years ago. That was terrorism. So there are places where there is terrorism, and there are places where there aren't. And of course, that's politically motivated. It depends on your politics, what you choose to call terrorism and what you don't.
So tell me, what do you do in BBC Watch in terms of encouraging people to take action? What are some of the things you do? There are several organizations that deal with different elements in the media, different, they focus on different media outlets. What is BBC Watch? What is your mandate in terms of encouraging people to hold the BBC accountable for this skewed coverage?
So on our website, we highlight problematic reports from the BBC. We try very much to provide the facts that are very often missing so that people are aware of the whole story and of the facts, and they can use that in making their own complaints. The BBC has a very specific complaint system. It's not like other media outlets where you can just write a letter and get an answer. They have a very long, complicated, labyrinthine complaint system that you have to be pretty brave to even embark on in the first place. But people who do get results, we get corrections. Things are changed, not always with credit, but they change sometimes. And the idea is to empower the general public, to provide them with the information they need, so they can make their own complaints and make a difference.
Our time is short. We only have about another minute or so. Again, tell us about the March 1st event. How can people find out more about it and the crux of the event itself before we have to go?
Yeah, you can see it on our website on bbcwatch.org. There's a button on the side, give you all the details of the event. Our keynote speaker is Professor Robert Wistrich from the Hebrew University, the head of the Bidal Sassoon Center for the Study of Anti-Semitism. And we have Lucille Cohen, who was head of the Jewish community in Manchester for many, many years. Myself and my colleague Adam Levick, who is launching a new website called UK Media Watch. I do the BBC, he'll be doing the rest. And we hope to have a really interesting discussion, and please come along.
So I'll bring my complaints about Sky News to him then.
You will, yes.
Hadar Sela, Managing Editor, BBC Watch, monitoring the BBC's coverage of Israel. I want to thank you so much for your time. Thank you that you came in studio today. It was a pleasure and an honor having you here face-to-face in studio. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Lovely to be here.
This is Josh Hasten, Voice of Israel. We just have a few seconds left. Just to give you an update, I'm going to be ranting after the bottom of the hour news. I still have a lot to say about the Copenhagen terror attacks, and I put something out there on Facebook. You can go to my Facebook, Josh Hasten, and check it out. I do actually have a page for the show itself, the Josh Hasten Show on voiceofisrael.com. But check out my brief paragraph in which I described my reaction to the Copenhagen attack, and then I'm going to get more into that after the break. You don't want to miss that. You too can be involved in the conversation on Twitter at VOIsrael. VoiceofIsrael.com is our website, Voice of Israel on Facebook, and you can also call in the show 077-899-4111 here in Israel, 077-899-4111 in the U.S. and Canada. Good morning to you. 929-502-555s, 929-502-555. We will take a break now for the bottom of the hour news and be back with much, much more. Josh Hasten, Voice of Israel. Don't touch that dial.
I'm a Zionist not because I'm a Jew, not because I've been to Israel, not because of everything that I've heard, but because of everything that I've learned.
This is Yishai Fleischer. Members of the ZOA Student Leadership Mission to Israel met me in studio here at Voice of Israel, and here's what they had to say.
It's very important that on campus we get the word out.
We're going to continue to be proud Jews, regardless of all the hate that we end up facing.
For the full interview, download the Yishai Fleischer Show on Voice of Israel.
Josh Hasten here, Voice of Israel. We are live in Jerusalem. It is the 16th of February, 2015, 3:34 in the afternoon. Unfortunately, we have to start this segment with some bad news here. Very sad. Senior Citizens Minister Uri Orbach of the Bayit HaYehudi has died after doctors at Jerusalem's Shaarei Tzedek Medical Center tried to save his life. He was hospitalized in January for the treatment of rare blood disease from which he suffered. Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Ruby Rivlin visited the minister on Sunday night before he passed away, survived by his wife and 4 children. Funeral is going to be held at 4:30 p.m. in Modi'in this afternoon, in about an hour from now. Just a little bit more on Uri Orbach. He worked as a journalist, writing for Yediot Achronot. He also co-hosted an army radio show called The Last Word, very popular show, an author of children's books and a dictionary of religious slang. Also the founding editor of the popular children's magazine called Otiyot, appointed the Minister of Pensioners' Affairs or Senior Citizens on March 18th, 2003. He lived in Modi'in, as I mentioned, and our very own Raoul Woodliff was at the Conference of Presidents meeting not too far away from where we're sitting here in Jerusalem just a few hours ago when Minister Naftali Bennett received word as he was up on stage addressing the group of Orbach's passing. He was handed a note, from what I understand, so Raoul was able to record what Naftali Bennett said on the life and legacy of Minister Orbach. We're going to play that very short clip for you here.
Just now I got a note that my dear friend, Minister Uri Shraga Orbach, Minister of Veterans, just passed away. Uri's a good man. Uri had a huge Jewish spirit. He's the guy that brought me into politics in something that's unheard of in the political realm. He actually said, "You come lead the party because we have to revive the party." Uri was a courageous man, civil courage, to stand up even when there's 20 people who think otherwise. Uri would stand up for his values, be it where it may, with good self-deprecating humor. I'm going to miss Uri, my older brother. May he rest in peace. Toda Rabba.
There you have Minister Naftali Bennett referring to Uri Orbach, may he rest in peace, as his older brother. Again, a funeral will be held to be laid to rest at 4:30 p.m. in just about an hour in Modi'in. Switching gears, I want to go back to the Copenhagen terror attack from the other day. And again, I really want to thank Charlotte Thalmay for coming on the show, a survivor of the attack who was in the basement. If you missed any part of that interview, you're talking about somebody who survived that attack. You're going to want to go back to our website, voiceofisrael.com, in just a little bit in order to hear that interview in its entirety. But I want to talk about something that's been on my mind ever since the attack and the reactions I'm seeing, the Prime Minister's words, etc. The question I have for you, dear listener out there, is on the subject of Aliyah. Okay? We have the Prime Minister of Israel saying Jews, it is time to come home. European Jews should immigrate to Israel. The prime minister opened his cabinet meeting saying that yesterday. But then you have, again, the chief rabbi of Copenhagen, and other leaders in the European community who are saying we should not be making aliyah out of fear. We should be making aliyah out of love. In other words, and again, I'm not, in terms of what Charlotte was saying, I wasn't going to challenge her on this. She just survived a terror attack. I wasn't going to get into a debate with her in terms of whether Jews should make aliyah from Europe at this time or shouldn't make aliyah. If now's the right time, should it be out of fear, out of love? But my personal opinion to all this, there are two pillars in Judaism, and I'm not a Torah scholar by any stretch of the imagination. There's so many rabbis around here, and they can add their 2 cents to this as well. But there are two basic pillars, okay, in Judaism. One of them is the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, and everything that goes along with that. And the other aspect, the other pillar in Judaism is the land of Israel. And I believe, from what I understand, the way I was taught is they hold equal weight. In other words, God wants the Jews to live in Israel. So, again, out of fear, out of love, I think you should come home to Israel, regardless of what it is. If you're running away, I don't believe you should be ashamed to say, the situation here is bad, I am running away to Israel. Okay, my personal family in 1941, my grandfather decided they were going to run away. The others disagreed. We're going to let it, and I'm not comparing this time period to that period. Obviously, there's so many differences. But the majority, the intellectuals, they said, we're going to wait it out. Everything will be okay. They weren't necessarily saying we're not going to leave, go to Israel out of fear. The circumstances are a little bit different. But I believe that even if it's out of fear, you should not hold your head low. And now is the time to come home to Israel. Whether it's out of fear, whether it's out of love, whether you're from a Western country, whether you're from France, the Ukraine, or any of these other places in the world, or whether you're from New York or Florida, it doesn't make a difference. You do it out of love. You're a Zionist. You've come from the U.S. Things are okay for the moment, by the way, in the United States. Okay, listen to this, all right? Madison, Wisconsin, anti-Semitic and racial slurs and swastikas sprayed painted on 30 homes over the weekend. So you can say it's a one-shot deal, but we've talked about on the show this happening at college campuses all across the United States, this happening in Chicago, in Miami, etc., etc. So I don't know what the weight is. You can make a million excuses until I have $1 million, until this, until that. I'm going to do it out of love. I'm going to not do it out of fear. I disagree. This is the home of the Jewish people. It is time to come home. There's no shame at all in saying I am doing this out of fear. My life is at risk. And that's my rant on that. If you disagree with all of that I just said, okay, I'm very passionate about this. I started it on Facebook this morning, essentially saying the same thing. And I don't know, it's up to like 100 different comments and people liking, people saying that I'm an Israeli snob and what right do I have to tell people where they should be living. Jews have rights to live everywhere in the world. They should have rights to live. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is two pillars. One is the Torah, one is Israel. This is one of the pillars just as important as the Torah. Ideally, of course, if we're all keeping the Torah and living in Israel, doing both of those, that's that's as good as it gets. If you can do both of those things, okay? There are plenty of non-religious Jews who live in Israel, okay, and don't keep all of the mitzvot or don't try to keep the mitzvot, etc. I understand that, but this is the place to be. The best of both worlds is keeping the Torah, being here in the land of Israel. That is a pillar, whether it's in fear, whether it's in love. This is your home. This is where you belong. If you disagree or you agree, send me a message on Facebook. Send me an email, josh@voiceofisrael.com. Feel free to do so. Now we're going to switch gears just here for a few more minutes, and then we're going to have Yarden Frankel, honestreporting.com. It is Monday here in the Josh Hasten Show. He will be in studio with me. Now, this is something that I don't actually care about. I mean, I do care about, but it's not really a story, but it is. And I'll explain. Speaker of the House John Boehner made a politically calculated decision not to inform the White House of his invitation to Prime Minister Netanyahu to address a joint session of Congress. This reported by the Jerusalem Post, fearing that President Obama would attempt to obstruct his speech. This is what he said on Sunday. He said that he made a calculated decision not to let the White House know of his intention. However, I have a report here from January the 26th in which Speaker of the House Boehner said on 60 Minutes, we gave them a heads up that morning, meaning we gave the White House a heads up that the Prime Minister of Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu, was invited to address the Joint House. Which one is it? Which one is it? Did he tell the White House? Did he not tell the White House? I honestly don't care. And I'm tired of talking about it, to be honest with you, because this is not the issue. This is not the point. Iran is on the threshold of going nuclear. And we're worried about, did he or didn't he tell the White House? We're worried about the protocol. We're worried about the treatment in terms of the U.S., Israel. I understand they're our greatest ally. I understand the relationship is strong. But the focus now should be on the Iranian nuclear threat and not on did he or didn't he. So that's why, number one, I don't care about it, but I'm talking about it for you just to show you how far and how crazy this has become in terms of a story. Did he or didn't he? That's the only reason I brought it up. I don't care. It's not the story. Of course I care, because it's the issue of Iran, and that should be the focus, not this ridiculous protocol or threats. We're going to do this, and that if you don't tell us. All this craziness going on back and forth. Egyptian jets bomb Libya after the jihadists behead 21 Copts. Those are Christians down there from Egypt. If you see another one of these Hollywood-style gory ISIS videos they put out. Unfortunately, if it is a real video, if it is legitimate, then of course a horrible massacre caught on tape. As a response, again, 21 Copts were taken down, marched down to some body of water, a river, an ocean, whatever it was, and their heads were cut off. In response, Egyptian warplanes today struck Islamic targets in Libya early Monday morning, hours after the video came out. A statement from the Egyptians said warplanes targeted weapons caches, training camps belonging to ISIS before returning safely. It said the strikes were to avenge the bloodshed and seek retribution from the killers. I'd like to see Israel get away with targeting, some country without the UN opening a Security Council or having a Security Council meeting at 4 p.m. on Christmas Day. If Israel were to defend itself or to take such action, the airstrikes came hours after jihadists posted again the gruesome footage of the beheadings of 21 Egyptian Christians on the internet, sparking outrage in Egypt and demands for revenge. So again, you've had Jordan then attack ISIS. You've had now Egypt attack ISIS targets as a result of these beheadings, lighting people on fire, and all that other horrible stuff that's going on with ISIS. At the same time, the Egyptians report that, according to the AP, that they discovered a smuggling tunnel, a 2.5 kilometer long smuggling tunnel from Egypt into Gaza, the longest passageway discovered in their crackdown on cross-border activity, cross-border smuggling. They say the tunnel was operated by obviously the Hamas, a faction of the Hamas, which Egypt says is a terrorist organization. Thank you. At least Egypt understands that and recognizes them as a terror organization that played a role in recent attacks against Egyptian security forces, detonators, communications devices, all the works. That was all found inside of that tunnel. Again, Egypt's security forces discover and take care of business. Discovered the longest tunnel, I guess, in recent history there. Anyway, much more to cover, but we are going to have to take a short break. This is Josh Hasten, Voice of Israel. When we come back, Yarden Frankel, HonestReporting.com, all the latest in anti-Israel media bias. Let's call it the good, the bad, and the ugly. Yes, maybe we will, maybe we won't. We'll leave that up to Yarden. My name is Josh Hasten. You too can be involved in the conversation at VO Israel on Twitter, Voice of Israel on Facebook, and voiceofisrael.com. Quick break. We will be right back. Don't go anywhere.
It's my people, it's my country, and I think we have a right to defend ourselves.
Hey folks, this is Yishai Fleischer. You've heard a lot about student apathy. Well, here's a group of students who are not apathetic.
I started the first pro-Israel group.
It's our right to be here, and I feel like Zionism is freedom, it's not racism. I feel like it's our obligation to be in the land of Israel.
For the full interview of the ZOA student trip to Israel, download the Yishai Fleischer Show only on Voice of Israel.
Carrie Nelson is a self-described tenured 60s radical, now fighting BDS on American campuses.
The left has always in the United States sought an ideal victim. When I was a kid, that ideal victim was the North Vietnamese. The Palestinians are now in that place. Now I find myself alienated from many of my left friends because their primary cause is opposition to Israel.
That's Rejuvenation every Sunday evening on Voice of Israel.
And we are back. We are live in Jerusalem. My name is Josh Hasten, and this is Voice of Israel, a brand new premier media network based at the beautiful JVP Media Quarter, downtown Jerusalem. This is where it's all happening. Go to our website, voiceofisrael.com, live, on-demand videos. We have it all, bringing you news that you are not getting anywhere else, bringing Israel closer. That is our mantra. Thank you so much for joining us here on the 16th of February in studio. Since it is Monday, Yarden Frankel, honestreporting.com. Yarden, welcome back to the program.
How you doing, Josh?
I am, I'm doing okay. We have this terrorism going on in Copenhagen. We have all this craziness going on all over the world, and Jews trying to stay alive. And the media doesn't side with us that often, as you know all
not
too
all
well.
that often. Not all that often. There's always things to talk about.
There's always things to talk about. That'll never run out. So tell us what is going on.
Well, we're going to start off with the good, because, we always try to do the good, the bad, and the truly ugly of media coverage of Israel. And I have to give you a little teaser here. The ugly today. I hope it's many hours since your lunch, because it is really, really ugly. But first, we'll start off with the good.
Please.
And the good is, I'm going to tell anybody listening one of the simplest things you can do if you support Israel.
Okay.
This is a fun thing to do. And it is the boycott movement, which is a movement that is against the boycotters, against the BDS movement, and especially when it comes to supporting artists who come to Israel to play. Now, of course, you've got all these artists who say they won't play in Israel because we're such a terrible country, because of human rights, everything. Roger Waters. And I have to say, I love Pink Floyd. I can't say it another way. I mean, I spent most of my college days, Pink Floyd was playing in the background somewhere.
And many Israelis do. You hear Pink Floyd on the radio, people like Pink Floyd.
Amazing artist. But Roger Waters is probably the most vocal of the BDS, the boycott artists, not only saying that he himself is boycotting Israel, but he actively tries to persuade other artists not to come here. One such artist was Alan Parsons, the Alan Parsons Project, who said no to him. That's my good, that Alan Parsons came here, came to Tel Aviv and performed. And I'll give a shout out also to my friends at Israeli Cool, who Ozzy Dave, a friend of mine, went toe-to-toe on their website with Roger Waters. Roger Waters referred to Israeli Cool as a extremist, obscure website. And, of course, this is a well-known blog in Israel. They're not extreme, they're not obscure, but I love the takedown. He said, by the way, you should know extremist, obscure websites. You ever see this one? It's a screenshot of David Duke's website, where Roger Waters is all over that. David Duke, of course, the Nazi Ku Klux Klan lead, oddball, anti-Semitic wacko in the United States.
They're buddies? Roger Waters
because
and
Roger Waters
David
is
Duke?
so vocal against Israel. Duke his website is full of Roger Waters, and that
Waters
ought to
is a
say
Dookie,
a lot.
huh?
So that's a quick good. It's a good. And by the way, if you just share the boycott graphic, if you go to the Honest Reporting on Facebook, you'll see that graphic that simply says support artists who are willing to play in Israel. Go buy a ticket. Go listen to Alan Parsons, Paul McCartney, the Rolling Stones, any of these guys who come here, go listen, and you're doing something for Israel advocacy.
I actually used to play a little bit, and I don't know if we can do that anymore with our copyright infringements. I'll have to ask Hermie on the other side of the glass. I used to play like songs of any artist who came here, Rihanna, it didn't matter who it was. If somebody showed up and was willing to play here, Alicia Keys, I would play their song. I don't think we can get away with that anymore, but anyway.
Kudos to them. Kudos to them.
Yeah,
That's a good.
Sure.
Let's move right into the bad. I have to tell you, J Street, for those who are not familiar, J Street is an organization in America that bills itself as pro-Israel, pro-peace. And I don't think I'm going out on a limb to say they are neither. If they are pro-Israel, then every mainstream Jewish organization out there is anti-Israel, because they take an opposite position, whether it's moving the embassy to Jerusalem, taking a tough line on Iran, whatever the issue is, whether it's conditioning aid to terrorists. J Street is on the other side. Right now, they have a campaign that says Bibi does not speak for me, because they're trying to convince American Jews to oppose Prime Minister Netanyahu's address before Congress. Now, here comes the bad. CNN is doing a story on the address. CNN is doing a story, and they want to know how American Jews feel about Prime Minister Netanyahu coming and talking about Iran in front of the Congress. So for a source, who do they go to? They quote J Street. In other words, they quote an organization that right now has a campaign convincing American Jews to oppose Bibi. They quote this group saying that American Jews oppose Bibi.
And they're going to rely on their numbers for everything, right?
They're going to
That
rely
makes
on them.
complete
And
sense.
that is not non-partial. Come on, CNN. You're a journalist. You can't go to a partisan organization and say, well, this shows that American Jews don't want Prime Minister Netanyahu to come.
And speaking of J Street, this just came out. I saw this today. J Street has invited Republican keynote speaker James, it says here on the Allgemeiner, James F, and I'll leave out the next three letters, the Jews Baker. James Baker to speak at the J Street event on March 1st to the 24th. He at their, I guess, their annual conference. Baker, of course, infamous for reportedly saying in private conversation while George H.W. Bush, he served as the Secretary of State, F the Jews, they didn't vote for us anyway. He was also very involved in the whole loan guarantees issue back in the early 90s. Here I have an article from the LA Times, 1992, in which he said Israel must stop all settlement activity, including roads, sewer, and water projects. If not, then America would pull its $10 billion in loan guarantees. This was James Baker, and he's their keynote speaker. So that just tells you a little bit about J Street. And of course, the issue, though, is CNN relying on such a group for their
Look, groups can be partisan
their
out there. They can be pro-Israel, anti-Israel, pro-peace, whatever they want. They can do it. But when the media says this group, we're going to rely on their data, it has to be non-partial data or the story doesn't make sense. And Josh, I could go on for hours about J Street, but I can't.
Because that's only the bad.
That's only the bad. There's something ugly. I need to talk to you about this. This is astonishing. I just came right now from Tekoa, not far from where you and I live, from the home of Sherry and Seth Mendel. Now, for those of you who don't know, one of their children, Kobe Mendel, was murdered by terrorists a number of years ago, and they have dedicated their lives to They started a foundation, Kobe Mendel Foundation, which does a lot of amazing things. One thing they do is a summer camp for children who have lost a parent through terrorism or another way. One of my children went to their camp, so I'm very grateful for the work they do. So I came from them because Sherry had written something in the Times of Israel the other day that I just scratched my head and said, this is so outlandish it can't be true. So I went over there, I interviewed them. We're going to have a video of this on the Honest Reporting website tomorrow, but I'll just tell you what they said. They said that back a number of years ago, about 10, 11 years ago, they were contacted by none other than NBC Brian Williams.
Right.
Brian Williams, who has now been suspended without pay for 6 months. I think it's forever because he's been caught lying about his role in news stories. He's been caught promoting himself, saying that he was involved in situations that were at great risk to him, which turn out not to be true. And that's something that's unacceptable for a journalist, but has somebody who cares about Israel. Okay, so where's the Israel angle there? Did that hurt Israel? No, those lies didn't hurt Israel. But many years ago, Brian Williams and NBC News contacted the Mendels and said, listen, we're going to be in the area. We'd like to interview you. And there was so much media coverage since their son had been murdered, they assumed this is what the interview was about. They wanted to come talk to people whose son had been murdered by Palestinian terrorists. Brian Williams, his producer, they showed up in Tekoa at the Mendels' house, and they started talking to them, and the Mendels were able to talk about their son, and they didn't think anything more of it, although at one point, the producer asked Seth Mendel, says, oh, by the way, do you have a gun? And Seth said, well, since my son was murdered, I did purchase a gun. What, can you show it to us? Well, no, I keep it upstairs in a safe. Well, we'd really like to film you shooting the gun. They said this. So Seth, right, all of a sudden he realized that, no, I don't want to go there. I don't want to fill your stereotype of a gun-toting crazy settler. So they said no. They did the interview, and then they were shocked later on when they saw the piece that NBC News, Brian Williams, the correspondent, came out with. They started the piece by saying there's a debate in Israel between those who support the settlements and those who are against it. They go to Tel Aviv to interview a woman there and says, what do you think about the settlements? And she starts this piece. This news piece begins with a woman saying, the settlers are a cancer in Israel, on Israel. They are the worst. They are responsible for all the problems of Israel. They are so self-righteous.
As if poor 14-year-old Kobe Mendel was murdered, was attacked in a cave with rocks, bludgeoned to death, as if he deserved it. That's the picture they are painting right there at NBC News and Brian Williams.
They interview this woman in Tel Aviv, and then they cut to a film clip, a video clip of Seth and Sherry sitting on the couch smiling. They had no idea they were set up. They were in a debate, and nobody told them they were debating. They didn't know that there was somebody from Tel Aviv, that there was another site. They were under the impression that NBC News came to talk about their son being murdered, and instead NBC was trying to set them up to show, look at these terrible, horrible people, the settlers. Seth, why don't you get your gun and shoot it in the air a bunch of times?
So the whole story, and we only have about a minute left, the story about Brian Williams, I guess that was somewhat of a reliving of those horrible memories of that clip for the Mandel family.
When Brian Williams is in the news for lying now, so when they saw this, they said, we have a Brian Williams story also. And by the way, it's Brian Williams, it's his producer, it's NBC News. It's not one person here because there were decisions made. Somebody made a decision saying, we need some stock footage. We need some real settlers. NBC, you want to film a real settler? Come on down here right now, you and me, right?
That is certainly ugly.
It is very ugly.
No doubt
very,
about it.
very ugly. Go to the Honest Reporting website to read more about this and watch the video interview tomorrow.
And we will see you, please God, again next week. Yarda and Frankel, honestreporting.com. Check out their website, all the important work they do. We are out of time for today. My name is Josh Hasten, and this is Voice of Israel. Get involved in the conversation. And if you missed any part of the show, it'll be up on demand soon. I am out. Talk again tomorrow.
You are listening to Voice of Israel, premier news talk from the heart of Jerusalem. To listen to more great audio, register for our live streaming broadcast